I'm Pastor Peter, if I don't know you, and thanks for joining us this morning. We always come back to the Word at the end of our services here because we believe that God speaks to us through His Word. So we're into that. We've been going through this book, the fifth book in the Bible, Deuteronomy, and been exploring that for the last 11 months or so quite a while. And we're kind of coming towards the end. Actually, there's a lot of things wrapping up and things concluding, and so I want to dive right into that. If you've got a Bible with you, you can turn over to Deuteronomy 31, and we're going to be looking at the first couple verses of that chapter. Pull it up on a phone, that's fine too, or you can follow along behind me. But in Deuteronomy 31, we start off, Moses is kind of beginning one of his final speeches. And he says, we're told, Moses continues to speak these words to all Israel. And he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I am no longer able to go out and come in. The Lord has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. The Lord your God himself will go over before you. He will destroy these nations before you so that you shall dispossess them, and Joshua will go over at your head, as the Lord has spoken. So pause there. Like I said, it's been almost a year that we've been going through Deuteronomy. And if you've been with us for this year, you've been looking at this picture. Oh, not that one. That's new. Well, we've looked at that as well, but that is not this one. Here we go. We've been looking at this picture. It's a map, right? Lots of different directions, lots of different stuff. Israel is locked geographically into a moment, in a real time, in real space. They're there on the east side of the Jordan River in Palestine, and they're looking over into this new land of Canaan that they are going to be going into. We've looked at this picture, and it's got Deuteronomy, that's the book we're in, and then there's been this tagline, following Jesus in changing times. And I was thinking about that this week, and I think I've maybe mentioned that tagline a handful of times over the last year. Haven't featured it. What we've focused on is, what does Moses say to the people? How do we see Jesus in these moments? How does Deuteronomy help us recognize who Jesus is and what Jesus is going to do? And then maybe every once in a while we've talked about the types of change that you and I are going through, or our cultural moment here, and how we might apply some of those pieces. But often I've let you guys draw the lines of connecting how Israel's going through some change. We go through change. Israel followed their God, and we follow Jesus. But the thing that I have doubled down on over and over and over again is this idea that the amount of change that Israel is going through is monumental. They are going from being a people group that is nomadic, and they've always lived in one place for only as long as the cloud of God's presence stays in that place. And as soon as he leaves, they pack up camp and they head out. They've never known an actual stable home, but they're about to become landowners. They're about to set up shops and live places permanently and then pass those places on to their kids as an inheritance. It's a whole different way of being. It's a big change. They've been a people group dependent on the hospitality of the nations around them, and so they'd send in these requests for hospitality saying, hey, we're just going to pass through. Please be kind to us. We'll be kind to you. They're dependent on that hospitality, but they are going to a time when they're going to be engaging in open war with the people around them. That's a very different posture. It's a big change. They've been used to hearing God's laws through that sort of nomadic space where, like managing a tent city and how do I apply God's laws in this context. But now they're going to be applying God's laws as, again, landowners, but also, they're in charge of maybe olive tree groves. You don't really do olive tree groves when you're traveling, right? That's a new context. They're going to be setting up walls around cities. Again, not necessarily something you do when you're traveling. They're going to be setting, there's just so many new ways to apply God's law in this different context. There's a lot of change. And all of it is sort of visualized by this River Jordan right in front of them. Big change in this moment. So I think we'd forgive Israel. If they weren't thrilled with Moses' message here. He says, guys, all of this is on the cusp of happening. Just so you know, I'm out. I'm done. Passing this off to Joshua. You guys know Joshua, right? He's going to take over from here on out. I wouldn't be thrilled with that. This does not feel like a strategic leadership changing moment. There's too much going on. Israel needs stability. In life in general, I think, when lots of stuff is going on, we try to gravitate towards, like, what are the things that are stable right now? Right now, our family's going to have a baby, right? So what do? I ask Bree if I can start a whole new grad program, right? And she says, no. You control your variables. You don't introduce unnecessary change into a moment where you have to face healthy change. But that's not what happens for Israel. Israel gets a message from Moses, I'm not going with you forward. We're going to have Joshua step in. And sure, we know Joshua. Joshua's been around for a while. He's been job shadowing and all that. But couldn't we have done this 3 years ago? Couldn't we have done this, and had this sort of slow overlap so this could be a celebration of how Joshua is already in charge, but Moses is saying, this is the guy? Or for that matter, couldn't Moses signed up for a 3-year consultation with Joshua for the next 3 years, where he just is there as an advisor? That would be helpful. He could just sort of set up shop in Jericho and Joshua could move around and stuff. None of that. Cut and dry. Moses is done. Joshua's taking over. I'd feel anxious at a moment like this. I'd feel frustrated. I'd feel fearful. And I don't think that we have to imagine that type of thing for Israel. 3 times in the text, God turns to Joshua, or he turns to Israel, and he says, be strong, be courageous, don't be afraid. The fear and the anxiety of the transition does have a certain type of stability to it. It's just not Moses. Moses points our attention to the true stability that Israel has when he says, the Lord your God himself will go over before you. They're used to hearing Moses be the institution, the voice of God. Everything gets funneled through him, but at the end of the day, it was still the voice of God. And they followed God in the wilderness. And yeah, Joshua's a new guy, but you know what? The person who's been fighting for them and leading them into battle and protecting them from the other nations all along, it was never Joshua or any of Moses' lieutenants. It had always been God. And so God is the point of stability. He's the anchor for Israel that draws them into this moment and is offered to Israel as a, calm down, this is remaining constant. God is still with us. And it's because of this that I've actually subtitled the whole series, Following Jesus in Changing Times. Because for Israel in this moment, so much is in flux, so much is up in the air, so much is transitioning, so much is changing, but God remains constant and calls them to follow him through all of that change. And he charts a path forward for them. Thinking about today, I can't really promise you that as you face change, right? So we're all going to do that. But as you face change, are you going to have points of stability? Are you going to have family that's always going to be there for you? I can't make that promise. I can't make the promise that your friends, your relationships are going to be the people that get you through everything in life. And then as long as you hold on to them, everything is going to be fine. I can't necessarily make the promise that your political party is going to be a rock-solid space that you can always rely on. I don't think anybody makes that promise, except for politicians maybe. There's nothing to point to that's solid, like Jesus is solid. Moses' always have to fade away. Joshua's always take over. But the thing that we hold on to as life changes is Jesus. And there's a tendency to think that the change that's going on in my life is so radically different than everything else that has ever been known to human history that, how could it's one thing for past generations to rely on Jesus, but, for our generation, they didn't have an unprecedented pandemic that covered the world and ... So I want to talk to you about my grandma. My grandma was born in 1932. And in 1932, the world was in the middle of a Great Depression. And that stayed with her whole life. To this day, the way that she thinks about food is shaped by the Great Depression. The way that she managed her finances through her whole life was shaped by this. It was a moment of huge change and transition for the world. Because really the Great Depression was just a blip in between 2 great world wars. During World War II, The entire world went into conflict, and my grandma got to watch that happen. And by the time she was 20, she had seen warfare completely transition in its strategy from being ground and sea-based to being largely air-based. She'd seen a whole new type of warfare in the invention of nuclear bombs, and atomic bombs, which were used at the end of World War II, were being upgraded to hydrogen bombs. All of this before she's 20. That's a lot of change. And we know the implications of those changes over the next decades, right? How much that shaped the political atmosphere, how much that shaped the U.S.'s fears and the U.S.'s passion and patriotism and our enemies and the way we formed our enemies and all of that different stuff. All of that change pregnant in the first 20 years of her life. On top of that, if we shift to economics, by the time she was 20, the credit card was invented for the first time ever. Think about the impact that has had on American consumerism. And silly putty hit the stores. So, loads of stuff. The world's always changing. My life is always in the midst of these huge changes on the world stage, on our national stage. There's nothing abnormal about that. And a tendency that we can have, I think, especially in the West, is to turn inward then. Right? So we can't control the culture, we can't control those things. What can I stabilize? Well, I can stabilize myself. I can make sure that I live by my principles, I live by my healthy habits, I live by my passions, and I pursue my healthy relationships with people. But the problem with that is, just looking back at my grandma's life, I never got to know her as the woman she was when she was 20. I met her in 1992, 60 years later, or 60 years from when she was born at least. And the 60-year-old version of my grandma was very different than the 20-year-old version. Her body had changed. Her mind had changed. And to this day, even from that last 30 years, there's even more transition and there's even more change. Our bodies are not things that we get to control. Our mind is not something that we have total control over. And eventually, both my grandma and I are going to face this final transition that everybody faces. And we don't have control over that either. The world is filled with change. And all the different things that we could point to as stable rocks eventually fade away, except for Jesus. Jesus is the constant for my grandma from her 20s all the way through now into her 90s. He hasn't changed. He is the one who walked the world through world wars and great depressions, through the invention of nuclear warfare and everything that's followed. And he gives us an opportunity to learn to trust him in the same way that he gave Israel opportunities to learn to trust him over and over and over again in the wilderness. And one day, when both my grandma and I and all of us face that last transition of death, and we cross our own Jordan River, Jesus can come to us in that moment and say, I've been there, done that. Let me do it with you now. Jesus is the one that we learn to trust as the world changes around us so we can trust him in that final moment and head off into eternity. So in this moment, for Israel though, the Lord commissions Joshua. He says, Moses, you're done. I'm going to take Israel into the promised land. I'm going to be a constant for them. I'm going to be stable for them. But I'm going to do it with this guy, Joshua, instead of you. And we're going to kind of gloss over this, but the rest of the chapter 31, covers the transition and the commissioning and the calls to action for Israel during this change. It's worth noting that Joshua is told, again, be strong and courageous. And then when the book of Joshua opens, that's what he camps out on. Be strong and courageous. He carries his commission faithfully. But Moses is actually given one more task. In 31, he's given one more teaching moment, one more responsibility to pass on to Israel. And oddly enough, it's a song. It's a poem. So they didn't give us the tune, so I can't ask Jackson to come up and play it for us. But here's the moment where it's given to him. He said in verse 19 of chapter 31, the author writes, Now therefore write this song. This is the Lord speaking. Teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths that the song may be a witness for me against the people of Israel. And while Moses gets to share after this song one more moment of blessing and pass that on to Israel, this is really his last teaching moment. His last act of leadership, his last moment where he stands between God and the people and brings God's word to them. This is a big final moment for Moses. And I got to say, if I were Moses, I might want a different final moment. He says the purpose of this song is supposed to be a witness against you. We've heard that before. If you've been with us in Deuteronomy, God has appointed in the previous chapter this giant witness to Israel on the top of a mountain. The law, the 10 Commandments can be put up there, and everybody gets to see this witness. God is in relationship with his people. Here are the rules. If you are faithful to it, blessings. If you're faithless to it, curses. And here again, a song is given to Moses at the end of Deuteronomy, right? Summarizing, in effect, most of actually the theology of Deuteronomy. And it's a witness. It's a testimony. It's saying God's going to call a courtroom trial together, and he's going to appoint he's going to appoint a jury. The song talks about who that jury is, by the way. But he's going to appoint a jury, and then he's going to call the first witness, the monument. He's going to call the second witness, the song. And we're going to hear the story of God and his people. And we're going to decide what's the verdict. Do they receive blessings or curses? And Israel, as they process their lives and they process the change from this point forward, the song is something that's easy to remember because songs are that way, right? Like they get stuck in our heads and they come with us. It's for everybody. The monument on the mountain, something easy to find, easy to locate, written in plain language for anybody to have access to. These things are meant to be there for all of Israel as a witness to them, to remind them of the relationship they have with God. So I wanted to let you sample the song, right? What is this song that Moses gives? I won't read the whole thing, but I want to let you hear it. This is Moses' final moment, right? Hear it that way. Hear the passion in it. Hear the testimony in it. What is being witnessed to in it? Moses writes, "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth, for I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your fathers, and he'll show you, your elders, and they will tell you. God found Israel in a desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness he encircled him, cared for him, he kept him as the apple of his eye, but you grew fat, stout, sleek, and he forsook God who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They've made me jealous with what is no God. They've provoked me to anger with their idols, so I'll make them jealous with those who are no people. I'll provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. And when they see that the power is gone, and that there is none remaining, bond or free, then the Lord will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they took refuge? Let them rise up. Let them help you. Let them be your protection. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. So rejoice with him, O heavens. Bow down to him, O all gods. For he avenges the blood of his children and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses his people's land. So those are just excerpts from it, but it kind of captures the general story of the song. I think it's sad. It's a sad moment to end on. And I think Moses isn't, super thrilled with this final assignment. In another text, he describes this moment and he's like, God, I wish that I could, just take Israel into the promised land. Just let me have that. Just let me have a little bit more. I don't want to end here. But this is where Moses' ministry ends. The song bears witness to a broken relationship, a people who are faithless to God when he's been faithful over and over and over again. Points to their past and says, look at all the ways that God's been faithful to provide for us. And points to the future and says, all these ways that God is going to be faithful to us, and still Israel is faithless in return. And so God pursues his glory through judgment. And he shows to the nations that he is a great God. He is the great God, as he judges his people for their rejection, and then as he judges the nations for their own rejections. In the end, no one stands except for God and God alone. There is none like him. It's a sad song. And after all the years of leading Israel, Moses has to leave his ministry here on this note. There's a reason for that. And I think it's deeply connected to the theology of this song, to the picture and the emotions of this song. And to flesh that out, if you will, let me tell you a story. So this goes back a little ways. It goes back to when Moses was new to the gig of being middle management for Israel, right? So God's in charge, then you got Moses, and then he does whatever, for the people. And he's handled a couple big problems. A few things have come across his desk, like when God said, I want you to lead people through the sea. And he's like, it's an ocean. It's like, how are we supposed to do that? And God's like, well, obviously, you just raise your staff, and then like the waters part, and I'll walk them through, right? So it's like 9 to 5 stuff. And then Moses, on the other side of that, it runs into new situations where there's no food for anybody, and he gets the complaint letter coming across his desk, and he's like, okay, well, we don't have any food. And God's like, easy, obviously, bread from heaven, right, to provide for the nation. It's like, oh, yeah. And Moses is learning the job and learning the job culture. So it really probably isn't all that shocking or strange to him when he gets another complaint letter across his desk. And this time it says, we don't have any water. We're starving, and we are all going to die. You lying charlatan. And he's like, excuse me? And then it goes on, and it says, you and your God let us out here to kill us. How dare you? And he's like, what do I do with this? And so he goes to God, as a good manager should. He goes to superior, and he takes it to him, and God's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to set a trial. They're accusing us of something? Fine. We're going to bring it to court. And the trial is set, and the jury is called. And the jury this time is the elders of Israel. So they all come and they gather. God says, I'm on trial, so I'll show up for my own defense. But Moses, I'm going to put you as judge. You carry the staff of the covenant and execute the judgment of however this goes. And the accusations are leveled by the elders. You let us out here to die. There's no water out here. We're all lost. Now, pulling back the scene, Israel's really mad. They're threatening to stone Moses in this moment. They're done with him. Come back into the story. And God doesn't show. Right? They're gathered. Moses is the only guy there to hear the accusations. But Moses has been given an instruction. When you hear the accusations, lift the staff and strike the rock as if it's an act of judgment. What rock? Well, it's the rock right there next to the mountain of God. And when the accusations are leveled and the verdict lands, and instead of Moses getting stoned, instead the rock is struck, water flows out of the rock, and there's enough water to take care of the entire nation. A whole stream comes out of this rock, and Israel's provided for. It's an incredible moment, right? Moses, in this moment, is, I'm sure, thrilled. Israel is shocked, and there's a little bit of humility, humbling process that Israel's hopefully going through, where they're like, wow, the God we accused of faithlessness, the God who was willing to come, well, he didn't actually show up, I guess, but who was willing to say he'll be on trial, and the one who we judged by smashing the rock at the foot of his mountain, he gave us life. He gave us water, and he came through. We provided for. Fast forward a couple decades. Moses is no longer new to the job. He's been doing this for a few years. Israel, he's watched go on a crazy journey with God. They've been at that mountain receiving the words of God. Then from there, they have sign after sign and picture after picture of God's faithfulness. So they go to the land that God promised them. They get there and they say, we don't think he can do this. And they back out. And God says, fine. I'll take care of you. I'll give this to your children. And we'll wait. Years turn into decades. And then Moses gets another complaint letter. And I got to imagine He tosses the letter up in the air, shrieking, "Are you kidding me?" and runs out of the tent as Joshua, scrambling around, picks up the letters to say, "What in the world is this all about?" And he looks down and says, "There's no water." Major deja vu. Joshua runs out of the tent. He goes to God and says, "God, what do you want me to do with this people? They're ridiculous. Absolutely, absolutely ridiculous. We've done this already." And God's like, I know. But here's what I want you to do. Gather the elders, form the courtroom, do the whole jury thing. They're going to come out. They'll level their accusations. You bring the staff with you. But this time, I just want you to talk to the rock and ask the water to come out. And I will. I'll take care of him. Moses is livid. So he goes out, and you can hear the tension in his voice as he gathers the crowd, and he gathers everybody there this time, not just the elders. The whole nation is right there, and fuming, he says, "You rebels! We will show you how we are going to provide for you." And he turns around, he raises the staff and smashes down on the rock. Nothing happens. I don't know how long he waited for the second round, but again, he smashes it down on the rock, and this time the water comes out and provides for all of Israel. And it looks for a second like, wow, another moment of Israel being humbled before God, where God provided for them. But then the story takes a turn, and God pulls Moses aside and says, "Because you have had no faith in me, and because you did not treat me as holy before the people, you will never enter the promised land." That's why this leadership transition is happening right now. That's the real reason. It said Moses was 120, but that's not the reason that he had to step aside. It was because of this moment. Now read with me the song that Moses is given in this moment where the judgment comes full circle and he's not allowed in. Starting verse 1. "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, like showers on the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord. I will ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness, and without iniquity, just and upright is he." I don't think it can be a coincidence that in the very moment that Moses receives the judgment on him for when he screwed up the water and rock moment, that he's given a song that describes God as the rock no less than 5 times. 5 different times throughout this, God takes on the title of the rock, saying, "I am the stable one, I am the faithful one, who over and over and over again has been faithful to you, Israel, while you have accused me and taken me on trial over and over and over again, accusing me of faithlessness." 9 different times the term comes up across the song. 5 of those are titles of God. 2 are comparisons to false gods who are trying to be rocks that don't come through. And then the last 2, are references to the way that God brought honey out of the rock. Not water, honey. God has done more than Israel could have ever asked for or imagined. He has been faithful when Israel has been faithless. And Israel's response, symbolized and realized in Moses, is they lift the staff of accusation and crack it against their God, claiming he has been a trickster and a charlatan. And they don't learn. Now, in the story, I hope you can, if you're familiar with the great story of the Bible, there's the triggers that are going off in the back of your mind. That much later, a different courtroom is going to be drawn. God's people, again, are going to be gathered. The jury is going to be right there. And accusations that are blasphemous are going to be leveled against their God. And Jesus is going to be executed and rejected by his people. And in that exact moment, the waters of life are going to flow out of his side as he dies and gives life to all his people. God knows what he's doing. God sees this from the beginning. There's no physical presence of God in the story of the rock because he is the rock. And later, the great rock of our salvation, Jesus, is going to be beaten so that you and I can live with God forever. But that's not so that we can take Jesus back over and over and over and over again to a cross, re-crucify him again, 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 and again. The New Testament calls us to call on the name of the Lord so that we would be saved, to recognize what Jesus has done for us, the humility that God has shown in letting himself be beaten so that life can be given to us, and that we would learn from this to follow him in faith. That's something Israel never could do. It's something that Moses ultimately wasn't able to do. And it's the reason they never got into the promised land until the second generation came around and God appointed Joshua to lead the second generation in. What I don't want to leave hanging over us is this fear that if we screw up our faith, we're going to get set aside. Instead, what I wanted to see is that God gave Israel opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to learn to trust him as they went through loads of different change, so that in the end, when it counted, they would respond with faith and enter the promised land. And instead of doing that, they accused him of being faithless. Where are you, God? Jesus extends the same invitation, I think, to us. He says, I'm going to give you a whole life worth of opportunity to learn to trust me, to walk through change with me, to see the world spin out of control, to see me in the midst of the evil, working it for good. Learn to trust me. Know that I humbled myself and was beaten for you, and that was enough to bring you to your own Jordan River and to pass into eternity, trusting me to walk you through. And these stories are shared with us so that we can learn from them and grow from them, apply them to our lives, follow Jesus in our own changing time, and then turn to the person next to us and say, can I share a story with you? So that you can see that Jesus is the one who was beaten for you, will lead you as a solid rock through all the transitions and change and turmoil in your life, and ultimately lead you to your own Jordan River. We are called to share this story over and over again. That's what it means to be disciple makers, to encourage people to come to Jesus and follow him. So, Moses' ministry ends at this moment where he ends up needing a Savior as much as anyone else. Our lives all come to the same moment. We need Jesus. We need to follow him, and we trust in him. So that's the invitation in front of you today, and in front of me today. Will we be a people who trust Jesus through whatever changing times he walks us through? Will we encourage others to do the same? Let's pray.